few weeks ago, Abby here left a comment asking if I could possibly shed some light on knitting cables. Now, I have absolutely no knitting tutorials on this channel, at least before this video, and it probably makes more sense to start with a more beginner level, this is how to get started knitting video. But you know what? The cable thing sounds a lot easier to film, so we are just gonna go with that. So sit back, allow me to over-explain the fundamentals of cables, and you'll wonder why you ever feared them at all. Abby, this one's for you. Here's a basic cable swatch, and I don't blame you for thinking it looks complicated. Not only does it do this weird crossover thing here, it's also somehow 3D and curvy, and oh my god, what is happening? But that's all a trick. The most fundamental stitches that any new knitter learns are the knit stitch and the purl stitch. And if you're watching this video, you probably already know that using just those two stitches, you can make a variety of textures. One thing you can do is work stockinette stitch by alternating knit and purl rows, making this smooth texture on the front and this bumpy texture on the back. And if you switch around partway through each row and work a reverse stockinette section before switching back, you get something like this. What you'll notice is that the reverse stockinette has a sunken appearance compared to the rest of the fabric. And now if we look back at our cable swatch, maybe you can start to see what's happening here. That's right, the majority of a cable's fancy 3D effect is just due to being surrounded by a bit of reverse stockinette. The stitches of your cable stand out against that sunken background. And before anybody writes in, yes, I know cables aren't always on reverse stockinette, it depends what the designer is going for, but it's usually the case and we're keeping things simple today, so shush. So we understand why cables have this 3D look to them, but surely the crossover part has to be complicated, right? Well, it turns out no, not at all actually. First off, I've prepared the first few rows of my knitting, and I know, Abby, this is exactly what you said you hate about cable knitting tutorials, but just go with me here, okay? Trust me. All I have done is set things up. I have 2 stitches of garter stitch border at each side and at the bottom to stop my example from rolling up into a burrito. Then I've done about 5 stockinette stitches either side and set up for 3 cables. Each cable is going to have 2 reverse stockinette stitches to either side, so here I've set up for a 2-stitch cable, a 4-stitch cable, and a 6-stitch cable. Everything in between is just stockinette to space them out so you can clearly see which cable is which. So because this part is just basic knit and purl stitches, I think a lot of tutorials assume you understand what's going on and they just skip straight to the crossover section, and that's where all the confusion is coming from. The majority of your time making a basic cable like this is literally just stockinette and reverse stockinette, and then it's your occasional regular crossover row that gives the whole cable its distinctive shape. So let's cross over, and this is where this whole tutorial gets janky AF, because I, a perfectly competent and confident cable knitter, do not own a cable needle. Yeah. So we'll knit across our row as normal, do our 2 purl stitches for the reverse stockinette, and here we are at our 2-stitch cable. The idea of a cable crossover is that we're going to divide the stitches of our cable into 2 equal parts. In this case it's a 2-stitch cable, so each part is just 1 stitch. We're going to ignore this first stitch for now, knit the second stitch first, and then knit the first stitch last. And knitting them out of order is what creates the crossover. At this point, usually you'll take your first stitch or group of stitches, basically the ones that you want to ignore in the first step, and you'll load them up onto a special cable needle. But really all this is just a conveniently sized needle to hold the stitches out of the way. It doesn't really do anything super special. So, instead of that, I have brought a pencil. Usually what I would actually do is use a DPN that's a little bit smaller than the needles I'm knitting on, or to be honest, a lot of the time I just drop the stitches and then pick them back up later. But I can't find my DPNs today, and I know that second thing probably gives a lot of you palpitations, so pencil it is. I'm just going to transfer our first stitch. Okay, yes, that is a little bit tight, this pencil is really too big, but you get the idea, I'm just holding it out of the way. Now, depending on your pattern, you might be asked to hold the stitch at the front or the back of your work. In this case, we'll put it to the front. Knit that second stitch. If you're using a real cable needle, you might then be able to knit this first stitch straight off of it, but in my case, I'll load it back up onto my left needle first. Knit the remaining stitch, and the thing with cables is you don't really get the full effect until a couple of rows after the crossover, but you can see this little slant to the left, so you can see that it has worked. So, onwards and upwards. Remember, for the purposes of my example, in between cables I am just doing these basic stockinette sections. Your pattern will obviously tell you exactly what to do. Here we're ready to cross over our 4-stitch cable. I've just done those 2 purl stitches for the reverse stockinette, and the next 4 stitches on my left needle will be the cable. So first of all, divide them in 2. This time that means 2 sets of 2 stitches. Let's load the first lot of 2 up on my trusty pencil, and why not? Let's see what happens if we hold these to the back of the work instead of at the front like we did last time. I'm going to knit our second group of 2, which is a bit of a faff with a flapping pencil in the way, but this is a lot easier than I'm making it look, honestly. Put the 2 stitches from the pencil back on my left needle and knit them as normal. What you can see here is that in the previous cable where we held the first stitch to the front of our work, the cable twists to the left. Here we held that first group of stitches to the back of our work and the cable is twisting to the right. So your pattern will specify whether to hold to the front or back, and now you know why. Same thing again, I've worked across to our next cable, including the 2 stitches of reverse stockinette. Now our next 6 stitches will make up this cable. That's going to be 2 groups of 3 stitches. Load up our first group of 3, I'm going to hold them to the front again this time because I like when things go left, and knit the second group of 3. 3 pencil stitches back onto the left needle, knit them, bam. You know the drill by now. I'm just going to complete this row and add another one, and then we can have a proper look. Remember, on everything other than the crossover rows, we are just knitting and purling in pattern. The crossover is the only complicated part. So the reason I've shown you 3 different sized cables is first of all to hammer all of this home, but also on the thicker 6-stitch cable you can already see a much more exaggerated typical cable shape. The curved effect is because that crossover is pulling the stitches from each side towards the middle. You don't have to do anything extra, that just happens. The 4-stitch cable is a bit smaller and less curved, and the 2-stitch has a clear crossover, but the sides are basically straight. That is because the fewer stitches we cross over each other, the less they're pulling towards the middle. Makes sense, right? Alright, I'm off to work 4 more basic rows. Your pattern will of course specify how many you should do, but 4 is enough for this demo, and I'll meet you back when we're ready for another crossover. If you internalize one thing from this video, I would like it to be the fact that the secret to cables is literally just building these straight columns by using basic knit and purl stitches, and then occasionally doing a crossover row to twist them. All of this shaping here is just literally from that one crossover we did. And then, as you can see, I'm just back to knitting the basic stockinette, reverse stockinette for the next few rows. I'm sure you have the idea by now, but we'll do another crossover row just to be sure. And this time, because the pencil was annoying and kind of got in the way of you seeing some stuff, I brought a bobby pin instead. Will it work better? I don't know. Okay, I've worked along to our first 2-stitch cable. Remember, we take the first stitch, hold to the front, knit the second stitch, then put that first stitch back onto the needle and knit it as normal. There you go. Meet you at the next one. For our 4-stitch cable, remember we're taking the first group of 2 stitches and holding them to the back this time to get our cable twisting the other way. Knit the second group of 2, reload the first group, knit as normal. And for the 6th stitch, yep, you got it. Load up 3, hold to the front, knit the second lot of 3, reload, knit. Look at this. It looks so complicated. Everything is so curvy, it doesn't look like any of those rows were made in a straightforward way. But now you know better. Not counting this garter stitch border at the bottom, you're looking at a total of 9 rows of knitting, and only 2 of them had anything more complex than basic knits and purls. Cables demystified! Hopefully. Obviously you can make a lot of variations with a basic cable depending on the direction, the size, how often you do the crossover row. Maybe you have uneven numbers of stitches in each group, so you have one skinny side of a cable and the other side of it is fat. Whatever. Thank you for the video suggestion, Abby. I do hope it helped. If it didn't and I did a terrible job and you're still stuck, let me know and maybe I can help if you have more specific questions. I'm currently working on a few other tutorial suggestions in various crafts, but if anybody else has something you'd like to see me completely over-explain, let me know down in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Alright, I will be back next week with some more crafty nonsense, so in the meantime, have a brilliant rest of your day and keep making cool stuff.